Hello, seventh graders. This is Mr. Chamberlain. If you are watching this video, it's because you are going to be retaking the test tomorrow on Tuesday. What I have here is the relearning packet that I gave you as I sent you to do this. I'm just going to briefly mention each of the parts to be included. Even though it says work on this section if you struggled, I'd like you to do the entire thing. And feel free to pause the video as we go along. If you pause it, then you'll be able to fill it out for each section. So, part one is about making an observation versus making an inference. When you make an observation, it's something that has to do with one of your five senses, like I see a car and the car is blue, or I see that it's raining outside. Just something that you can use your five senses to see. Not making any guesses, it's just literally what you see. They can be qualitative, which just is words like red or heavy or green or wet, or they can be quantitative, and that would always have a number in it. So for example, there are 75 dogs or whatever. Now an inference, on the other hand, is when you've seen something and then you make a conclusion about it. For example, a observation could be Mr. Chamberlain is crying. That's what you observe. But the inference might be Mr. Chamberlain must be sad. That's an inference because when you see me crying, it may remind you that maybe when you're sad, you cry. So an inference is something that you make a guess about based on the observation you make. And I'm going to go into part two now. Part two is about the scientific method. So when we do a scientific experiment, for example, when we looked at our pond creatures, or when we built our filter out of stuff from a backpack, we always have to start by identifying what's wrong. Then we make a guess about how we can solve the problem. We design an experiment on it. We do the experiment. Sometimes they call this testing your hypothesis, but it's usually the fun part of the lab. We collect the data, which might be numbers or pictures or graphs. And then finally, we try to answer the problem or question that we had. So use that for part two. And now we'll go into part three. For part three, this is the metric part. It's kind of like you figure it out or you don't. It can be tricky. All that we really care about is that we always start with the main unit. It might be meters, liters, or grams. When we want to convert it either to the main unit or when we want to convert it to something else, we just move a decimal point over. So if we wanted to go from meters to centimeters, whatever the number is, we would move a decimal over 1 over 2, and that might involve adding some zeros. If we wanted to go to kilometers or kilometers, we would move the decimal point to the left, 1, 2, 3, and that might cause us to add some zeros on the other end. So this section is for that. On top of that, we also have volume. Volume is just length times width times height, and density is mass divided by volume. I'm going to go on to part four. So variables, as we remember in our lab, are things that might be different when we do a lab. They're usually things we can look at the beginning of the lab. So an independent variable is something that you're going to decide to change. For example, if I wanted to know what items might make the best dirty water filter, like the lab we did, independent is what you're going to change on purpose. So what you change on purpose for the dirty water lab is what you're going to clean it with. There was a bunch of things to use, but you might have decided that baking soda worked really well, or a filter might work really well. The dependent variable is what's going to change when you've made your decision. So in the case of our cleaning dirty water, what would change as a result of the lab is the water. Maybe it got cleaner, maybe it got dirtier. So use that information for this. And our final section that goes with this is graphing. Same kind of thing before. Graphing just uses the data that you have to look for relationships. So you might notice that as the mass goes up of the quarters, the amount of water that they move goes up too. So we're just looking for a pattern. For the final section, section 5, these are just words that have to do with what we learned about this unit. If you have trouble, you can always Google them, but they're pretty straightforward otherwise. Okay, use this information. Hopefully you paused in between or whatever you needed to do to answer them, and you'll be a little bit better prepared for the test. Good luck.